what is that number that can help people understand what their impact is? I started Clever Carbon because during my sustainability journey, I was living in London at the time, and I lived by a park, and every Monday I would go walk in the park, and Saturdays and Sundays were busy days. And so everyone's at the park and they're bringing coffee and beer bottles and plastic containers for food. And then so when I went for a walk on Monday, it was literally like this garbage dump. This beautiful park became garbage dump, and the garbage cans were filled, and then there was like garbage all around the garbage cans, and I'm like, how can we be doing this? And I feel like there's always that number, what gets measured gets changed. We know the number of steps we take a day. We know how much REM sleep we're getting. We know our running speed. We know how many calories we're eating. We know numbers. The human brain operates really well with numbers. We don't even have to understand what it is. Like, no one really knows what a calorie is, but we know numbers and we can compare it to each other. And so to me, when I saw this garbage, I was like, what is that number that can help people understand what their impact is? And I started learning about carbon footprint because of that. I was looking for that number, looking for information. And all the websites I went to were not consumer friendly. They were clearly not meant for people like me. It was very technical. But as I started to learn more, I saw a carbon label for the first time. It's essentially like a nutrition label, but for a product, and it helps the consumer understand where the emissions from the product are coming from. And I started taking personal carbon footprint quizzes, and then everything just sort of clicked. And I was like, I want people to know their impact and their carbon footprint. And I want to do it in a way that is hip, fun, convenient, not doom and gloom. And that's how Clever Carbon came to be.
Wow. That is kind of, there's a whole bunch to unpack there. I was curious on one of the things you said, which was you looked at a label that actually had kind of what company was doing that already?
Yeah. So there are a few companies that were doing it. It's funny. The label that I saw was a prototype. It was like in a scientific paper. It hadn't even been rolled out, but there are many brands that carbon label today. One that I want to highlight is a brand called Panties. It's Pantys. They're an apparel brand. They're based in Brazil. And what I really like about what Panties has done is every single product in their portfolio has a carbon label. They've done a life cycle assessment to understand where the carbon emissions are for the fibers, the materials, the sewing, the manufacturing, the packaging, the shipping, the use, and the end of life. So we call that cradle to grave, and that's really the gold standard. And they share the emissions at each stage of the life cycle with the consumer. And what's interesting is that about 20% of the emissions actually come from the use. And that's because detergents have a high footprint and have a high impact on the planet. And Emily Ewell is the CEO, and she actually didn't know that until she did an LCA. So, I really encourage brands and companies to do LCAs because what gets measured gets changed, and you learn things you didn't know before.
Yeah, I think that is my hope. I think over the next, it's going to take some time to do this. But if I think of when I was a kid, all the packaging, I don't have any food here, but all the packaging and the food that you ate didn't have nearly the nutrition information that it had that as it does today. So I think part of the challenge here, it needs to be shared because manufacturing is typically made for like a large audience or a global audience. But the way you deal with waste and disposal is so regional. And it's all very different. Like chances are where you live versus where I live is all very different. I think manufacturers need to have accountability in that entire supply chain from the beginning to end. It's not okay for Coke to produce how many, I don't know, they're probably one of the top water bottle manufacturers in the world and have no liability whatsoever of what happens with that. Yeah. And so my hope over time, and I think I think Clever Carbon can be a really helpful tool for that, is consumers start to ask for this and they start to drive change with their wallet. And they say, hey, I want to have something where I understand, its impact beyond just the calories that I'm eating.